At this time, okay, welcome. We are recording the event, and I am very happy to welcome you here. I am Mary Susan Gast, the current Poet Laureate of Benicia, and I also have been the editor for the column in the Benicia Herald, Going the Distance. And Going the Distance has had a couple of subtitles since it began, but I went from editing that to going ahead and working with the editing of the book that we are reading from today, which is Yearning to Breathe Free, a community journal of 2020. So as we begin, I just wanted to let you know some of the mechanical stuff that we're going to be doing for this event. We will have everyone muted now that we've stopped just greeting each other and having fun. And when it is, or if it is your turn to speak, you will go ahead and unmute yourself. We will have each speaker, each reader spotlighted. And that means that the focus will be on them. There will be a slideshow going on next to them in the frame on your screen. And that slide will be the page from Yearning to Breathe Free that they are reading from. Although we don't know if they will be reading it from the screen. We hope not. We hope each reader has their own copy. Anyway, we will have readings from the book. We will have, after that, a time for discussion and conversation. I will alert you that if you want to use the chat and to observe it, feel free. If you find it distracting during a poetry reading to have the chat going, just minimize it. You don't have to look at it. And you can hit save chat at the end of our session so that you get to save all the comments that were made. We're going to make one other use of chat. If, as we're going along, a question comes to you or something that you'd like to have discussed during our discussion time, you can make a note of that in chat. And at the end of our poetry presentations, Johanna will scan the chats to see if there are any particular ones for group discussion, and we'll figure out a way to get into that conversation and into that discussion with any of the things that you may have wanted to bring up. Okay, so we are ready to begin, and we're going to begin. Well, first of all, I have to say some thanks to Fran Martinez-Coyne, who is the Benicia Library staff person who works with the Poet Laureate program. And that entails a whole lot. And especially in these years since 2020, when we've all gone to virtual events and learning how to use Zoom and what we can do with it and what we can't do with it. And Fran, you have just been such a marvelous companion along this journey. We could not have done any of our Poet Laureate programs, First Tuesday poetry groups without you. And you have been so willing to take on new adventures as we come up with different ideas for, wouldn't this be a great way to present something? So thank you so much. And I also want to thank Constance Butel, who is our techie person who has done the slideshow that will accompany the readings of the poems. So, Yearning to Breathe Free. Back in 2020, the World Health Organization on March 19th declared that COVID-19 was indeed a global pandemic. Excuse me, I misspoke. It was on March 11th that happened. On March 19th, California became the first state in the United States to mandate a blanket stay-at-home order. So as we get into our program, that's the time that we're kind of taking you back to. Global pandemic, and then stay at home, shelter in place. As I have mentioned, the book Yearning to Breathe Free is the collection of those newspaper columns that started up in the Benicia Herald and ran from April 1st, and they're still going on. But the collection that is in Yearning to Breathe Free is the collection from the beginning, April 1st, through Election Day of 2020. When that blanket order came in that we were going to be sheltering in place, I wrote an email to Galen Cusick, who was the editor of the Benicia Herald, and said that, you know, I have an idea that maybe as this shelter in place thing goes into place, we might want to have a newspaper column in each edition of the Herald. The Herald comes out 3 times a week, that would voice and speak to the fears, tensions, inspirations, hopes, and oddities that we are experiencing. And he responded with encouragement. And then I called for contributions to the column, and lots of people responded locally, and then our community expanded geographically, and writers were willing to write to fill this column. We had poets, writers of prose, some quite experienced, others literally who had never written anything before for publication. Everybody sent in something, it seemed, and not every submission was published, but everyone who submitted something was published at least once, because one of the intentions for the column was to give voice to the community and to all of us who were feeling isolated and really were part of that sheltering in place. So more than 60 writers from diverse ages, backgrounds, and circumstances contributed to the newspaper column from April 1st to Election Day. And those are the writings that appear in the book. I put in the chat early that the book is available for sale at a number of different places, as well as it can be borrowed from the Benicia Public Library. So you can check the chat if you're looking for a copy of it. So as we wrote, and as everybody around us went into this mode of social distancing, the column started and it kept going. And there was a lot of community support for the column. I got many appreciative emails from people who weren't writing, but were reading. And I'd like to call on Elizabeth Patterson, who was mayor of Benicia during 2020. And I'm wondering, Elizabeth, if you'd just offer some comments from your perspective as mayor at the time as to how this column, how these writings affected people.
Well, first, let me say thank you very much, Mary Susan. You're so inspiring as the poet laureate. The program, the vision I had for the program and that the Board of Trustees of the library had for the program have been met by each of our poet laureates. But here was a challenge in the pandemic that we didn't anticipate. And your response and leadership is self-evident in what we're going to be going over today. So that was really helpful. And also I want to thank Mary Eichbauer. I call her my Renaissance woman. She's just amazing. And just lots and lots of appreciation for what she has done with editing and I'm sure other endeavors. And then I didn't realize that Constance was involved in the technical thing. So I want to say thanks to Constance. So one of the things I said on the back cover was we were scared. and we were feeling isolated, but I was incredibly busy because we had a whole new dynamic in the city to deal with. So I was kind of distracted with how do we proceed? And we were fortunate with amazing staff, but it was always a challenge of listening and coming together and enhancing city government's role, working in collaboration. And in some ways, Yearning to Breathe Free was able to unite us. And obviously not everybody in the community, but enough of us that we felt, yes, we had a community. And we needed to keep listening, because I think that was one of the biggest challenges with most people being isolated. As I said, I was pretty busy. It was like constant days and hours because of our responsibilities to keep government running. We were also fighting for bold action. And I think that part of, you may not think of this as bold action, but in fact, to me, Yearning to Breathe Free is bold action. And a lot of the topics covered, I felt, it's not gun shy away from some of the really compelling issues. And so that to me was bold. But we also had to avoid reckless impulses. And I will tell you, I never saw so many reckless impulses coursing their way through decision making. And it took a lot of energy to deal with that. And so kind of my anchor was the hopefulness that I always was getting from Mary Susan. She's got this amazing sense of grabbing what's serious, but also always providing that hope. And many of the other poems were like that as well as we got through the system. So things could have really gone so wrong really quickly. And I think by having this access in the newspaper, it was self-evident that we were in this together, we were going to survive, and we're going to come out better. That was not a given. And I can point to other communities where there are pretty good examples of where that was not a given. The contribution of Yearning to Breathe Free, just think about it. We had air quality issues that have been persistent and chronic. We then had the situation with George Floyd, which was more than gut-wrenching. It was tearful, and we had responses to that. And Breathe Free, that's what that was all about. I also wanted to say thanks to all the poets. I reread a lot today, sat down with my cup of coffee, and that was my Sunday morning exercise. And I just got so involved, and I sort of forgot a lot of things, and they started coming back to me. And so I wanted to thank all of the poets for kind of memorializing that. When I go back and read these, I can say, oh yeah, I remember I was thinking about that, or I felt that, or did I really feel that way? And then of course, always a special thought for Roger Straw. His poems tend to reflect most of my attitude and my take on things. And so I really appreciated that. And also because he's kind of gone through an eye issue, and I'm glad to see that he's doing better. And then I kind of wanted to end with a personal story just to bring it home. So COVID hit, and it was an opportunity for my daughter to leave Oakland. And so during COVID, I helped pack her up, put her stuff in the pod, cleaned up the apartment, and waved goodbye to my pizza beer drinking buddy. And she's up in Seattle, and it's a good move for her. It's really wonderful. I'm really happy for her. But of course, it's my loss. So COVID ended for me in responsibilities at the end of the year. I didn't run for re-election. And I just want to say that I use the Yearning to Breathe Free as one of the more positive aspects of more than 20 years of service with the city of Benicia. So again, thank you so very much. I'm going to stay on mute and listen to all of you, and maybe we can have some comments afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And knowing you were that supportive of what was going on with the column and with thoughts really made us all feel a lot stronger. And thank you for picking out some of those things that really were meaningful to you and to the city. And I hope all of you who have written for the column or for the anthology heard yourselves reflected in Elizabeth's remarks. You really did bring so much to this very, very treacherous, tremulous time. I'm going to call on Mary Eichbauer, the Renaissance woman, who also was the editor with me of the anthology, for just a few words on how we made that transition from newspaper columns to a book.
Thank you, Mary Susan, and thank you, Elizabeth. Editing this community journal for publication with Mary Susan was kind of a profound experience for me, because Mary Susan had the foresight to realize that the time would come when we'd really need to reflect on the harrowing and unique events that we had just been through, and all the feelings they evoked and the losses that they brought with them, because we've all experienced some sort of loss from those times. Yearning to Breathe Free was unique in the projects I've worked on, because it brought together the personal responses of a whole community day by day, while everyone was suffering from uncertainty and doubt. And it felt like we were really working on a piece of a historical record, that this was raw and unmediated, and it was a testimony to hope and despair, anger and fear, inspired by events as they were unfolding. So as we worked on this, we were careful not to change anything. If there was an obvious misspelling or a misused word or something like that, Mary Susan would consult the author to see if we could make that change. But in general, we had to edit with very light touch, because we wanted to keep the rawness and the immediacy of the reactions as they went into the book. So we didn't want to smooth out or polish out the rawness, the anger, the sorrow, the frustration, or the humor and the hope. And even if, as times changed, if the general attitudes had changed as well, we didn't want to change that. We wanted really to remember, so that we can all continue to process these feelings and these experiences as we move on. So really, I want to express my admiration and thanks to everyone who contributed. Your work was beautiful and immediate and important, and it was a pleasure working on it. I also want to thank Mary Susan, of course, for conceiving the project so early on. I just found it very impressive that you knew right away that this would be something valuable to do. I also want to thank Deborah Fouché for designing the book, Tom Stanton for working on the cover. We had a lot of support from Roger Straw as well. And I also want to take a moment to thank the Benicia Literary Arts Board for believing in this project and taking it on when Mary Susan proposed it. So thank you all. I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to hearing everyone read their work.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. So we now are going to proceed with these readings, and they will come up on the slideshow as a page from the book, because that's what they were. Each column got turned into one page of the book. And for the purpose of the book, each column was given a title, because themes emerged. When we went back and looked at what was there on April 1st, a theme seemed to be in order. And we did that, gave them headings for each day. And then something we were not able to do, of course, at the time the columns were being written, was that we were able to go back and get the statistics from Johns Hopkins University on what the death toll from COVID in the United States was as of that date. So all of those statistics are added. And for this reading today, and Constance, you can go ahead and put the first slide up, which is the cover of the book. For the reading, we're going to be looking at the page. I will serve as the page turner. In other words, I will announce the what the theme is for that day. I will tell you who the reader of the poem, or readers in some case, will be. And we'll kind of go on uninterrupted from page to page, from poem to poem. At the end of each page, I will bring you the grim announcement of what the death toll was that day. Again, we're trying to just take this, a slice of time, take you back there so that we can look at what happened in order that we can then look at where we are now, where we've come, what we've learned, what is still with us. So with that, we shall begin. And we will start with that very first column that was written, the very first column that appeared on April 1st, 2020. The title for that day is Shelter at Home, and we are very fortunate today in that both poets who wrote for that column are here. So we will hear first from Suzanne Bruce and then from Johanna Ely.
Thank you, Mary Susan. Just to speak a little bit about the poem, I wrote this poem 2 weeks after we began the shelter in place. Those words alone scared me. In my home office where I work, there's a big window next to my computer. And outside there's a plum tree and some red tips that they just frolic in our Delta breezes with unrestrained joy. Looking out that window every day, I began this poem not knowing how long we would have to be restrained. And it made me wonder, and it made me think, how must we not let this fear take us over? And that's where this poem came from. 2 weeks ago, March 30th, 2020. My windows were pass-throughs, outside inviting play and faithful light of freedom. Undistracted frolic, splendor in little fragments, costs nothing to sing in this space. Now each day comes with a price, virus unfolding like a crumbled map, roads to new paths uncertain, powerful, pivotal, plows, drops into the unknown, stops any hope. Stay in, social distance, mask to conceal, gloves to ensure, eyes reveal hesitation to look beyond the fear. My mind wants to block, locked like my windows are now. Grief begins to cover as I huddle underneath a fleece blanket. 2 weeks ago, my world now memorized by my heart, must remember, must not forget. This is where faith begins.
You need to unmute, Johanna.
Thank you. As Suzanne mentioned, it was 2 weeks after the official lockdown when we wrote our poems. And I think I was stunned by our sudden isolation, stunned by the silence, stunned that a virus so pretty under a microscope, a virus resembling a crown, was a deadly crown. But also I noticed that the natural world continued. Like Suzanne, I looked out my window. I saw the hummingbirds at my feet every day, and I was hopeful that somehow life would continue and that we would continue, that the natural world would continue. And I still hold that hope even now. Corona. Corona, halo of death, a crown no one wants to wear. We isolate ourselves in fear, give up trains and planes, the touch of a hand, the embrace of a friend. We hide under blankets in unmarked tents in the last room that has a view of the sunset. The natural world continues. A hummingbird quivers in the air. A tree blossoms into luscious green. A warm breeze rustles the butterflies awake. Standing 6 feet away from someone else, I watch the sun disappear behind the trees, each of us crowned with its light. Thank you.
And on April 1st, 2020, there were 6,662 total deaths in the United States from COVID-19. On Sunday, April 5th, the theme for the day was uncertainty. And Peter Bray will bring us his take on that uncertainty.
Thank you. Am I coming through? Am I unmuted?
You're good.
Okay. I I went about my normal business as fearful as anyone else, listening to the ludicrous statements of Donald Trump on how it was all a hoax. It was all going to blow away when the weather got warm. And I was down at Raley's noticing that there was a lack of toilet paper, napkins, what have you. And probably not since my mother a few years ago gave me the ration books from World War II. And probably in the back of my mind, suddenly we were in World War II rationing from sheer utter global stupidity. And as I got to the front counter, for some reason I was buying bananas those days. I like bananas. But as I got to the front of the self-checkout line, where there was a normal plethora of bananas, I saw the last banana. And that just epitomized my mental state. So I wrote the last banana. I think I went out in the driveway, out in the parking lot rather, and I wrote it. And this was on 3/20. I'm not sure when the lockdown occurred, but we were definitely in it, I believe. Anyway, the last banana. Today I bought the last banana at Raley's. Somebody left it, not on the wire hanging rack, but above it, undersized as it was, on the small display shelf, a token offering of benevolence, perhaps, in the, quote, shelter-in-place chaos that currently infects our planet. I don't understand the communist state, whose occupants must eat bats. Living upside down in infected caves or doorways, is this the measure of superlative governance? Are these Chinese FDA-regulated and inspected bats range-free, gluten-free? No MSG? Or are they the scrub of edibles, coronavirus infected, overlooked for millennia by the non-existence of an imposter Donald Trump equivalent, closing down the Chinese EPA if it ever existed? Or are they tariff complicated, proving something to somebody in the aftermath of whose delayed public disclosure the most? Or the longest for whose political expedience? Who will win the tariff wars or lose the most innocent, hapless residents in deaths to this first pandemic of this generation? Bananas and bats and banana republics. The countries continue. Shelter in Place. Peter Bray, copyright 3/20/2020. Thank you.
And at the end of April 5th, the day this was published, the total deaths in the US from COVID-19 numbered 12,780. By April 10th, we were hanging on. And Bobby Richardson brings us his take on that.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. I wrote this. It kind of right down my alley. Had some political innuendos in it, which I like to write about, social issues. So I called it Camp Corona, USA. They say familiarity breeds contempt. If you subscribe to that philosophy, then please allow me to vent. To be different is to be blessed. I mean, what if we were all the same? Can you imagine the bigger mess? Imagine much more madness than we currently have now. Just like the coronavirus, it would manifest numerically. I mean, wow. I bet you couldn't stay here no matter the price. And would you really want to, even to save your own life? The simple differences that we fight about, those apparent idiosyncrasies, all these things would pale and we would begin to think. Think about how precious life is and what past truths we might revamp. To quote Dr. King before he died, we're all in the same camp. A camp that can fold up any time, reminding us of our fragility, the obvious and the sublime. Out of sight is not always out of mind, is what I'm trying to vent. I hope I got you thinking, America, while the coronavirus does its best to tear down your tent. Thank you.
And by the end of April 10th, the death toll in the United States from COVID-19 was 23,692. Isolating was the theme for Friday, April 17th, and we will hear from Sherry Sheehan and Evie Grock, who both wrote for that day's publication.
My poem, as you can see, is an acrostic poem, Pandemic. Please, I ask nervously, don't we know that this experience mimics incidents from earlier centuries? Perhaps exact answers never arrive, denying me examples of meaning in this COVID-19 crisis that simultaneously provides an opportunity to navigate my life more deliberately than ever before, while making self-isolation courageously, curiously contagious. Thank you.
Can you, oops, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Evie Grock, and I just want to point out that what you will see on the screen doesn't quite match what I'm going to read, because this is the entire poem that I'm about to read, not just that part that got divided. So it's not your eyes, it's a different, slightly changed reading. Being the naive person I sometimes tend to be, when the pandemic crisis hit us, I wanted so passionately to believe it would peter out soon. And my whole outlook was, we'll get through it, we'll last, shelter in place as you need to, but we'll get through it. It's not going to take that long, it won't be that bad. And that was probably the biggest misconception I have had in my entire life. Generally, I'm a very humorous person, and the little humor I was enjoying is not something I was able to share or willing to share because it just wasn't appropriate. But my Evil attempts at humor were only for myself. I enjoyed the Facebook jokes about boycotting Corona beer, going to looking at the jewelry ads for toilet paper earrings, all that I had to get out of my system before I could actually write my couplets of coping, which took a more realistic view of where we were at. And this is couplets of coping. Out of nowhere comes a plague with an inconspicuous start. Now pandemic shivers keep us 6 feet apart. We hunker down in our trenches of fear, model bravery for our young, don't shed a tear. Venture out only for veggies, eggs, and bread. We seniors have reason. Outside we fear to tread. My mask, my gloves, my scarf, and my will are my only defenses against the battle uphill. I spend 20 seconds washing my hands and 20 more checking for swollen glands. So please step aside when you see me approach. Teach this to your children like you're their coach. The thing that will save us and unite us all is the distance we put between us till fall.
And the death toll as of April 17th was 38,995. On Wednesday, May 6th, we had poems that discussed what it's like now that we've been into this for over a month. We will hear from Juanita Martin.
Thank you. At the time, I was feeling like if I don't make it, and I'm one of these people that unfortunately dies, I wanted there to be something on record of what I felt like it was before COVID got here. And so that was the impetus for this poem. I was sitting at my dining room table where I am right now, and it was a Thursday, I remember that. And I thought about writing a poem. I wasn't sure how it was going to come out, what was going to happen. I had written something before, but it didn't get published, but this one did. And they were cutting the grass outside, the landscapers were cutting the grass. And so that kind of spurred me on to write. And as I was smelling the grass, I just noticed something different about it. And so this, again, was part of the poem about what I wanted to remember about yesterday, the yesterday before COVID got here. And so that's why this poem is aptly called Before COVID-19. I took a long whiff of yesterday so I could remember what it was like before, when the wind whispered my name, rain danced upon my shoulders. I tapped into nature's beauty I once took for granted, flowers that turned their petals to a laughing sun, trees that recolor earth. Now inside, during a recent spring, effects of a virus, I inhaled freshly mowed grass against an uncertain sky, but the scent is not the same.
As of May 5th, the US death toll from COVID was 77,057. On May 5th, we were writing about essential workers. And Galen Cusick was to have read his poem from that date, but was not able to make it here today, so I'm reading mine. This poem was written right after I hung up from a phone call with a then 95-year-old friend who I've known a long time. And I called for her birthday in April. And during that conversation, we talked about all of the ways in which our lives had changed. And she mentioned that her son had died. This is a death on the sidelines. Victor died last week of lupus, not COVID-19, in a VA hospital in Washington state. No friends switched sentinel duty at his bedside. No family hustled in from Iowa, all hostage to the killer microbe. Victor's neighbor is a nurse working in that hospital above and beyond her shift. She stayed with him as he left the realm of time and space. She is bivocationally and indisputably an angel. In strictly theological terms, angels are messengers from God. In totally realistic terms, angels are envoys from the great love at the core of the universe, at the heart of our hearts. Angels, these desolate days, often appear adorned in masks and ill-fitting gowns, but there is no mistaking them. She stayed with him, and she brought us comfort. Victor's mother told me on the phone through her quarantined heartbreak. The death toll in the US from COVID on that day was 80,727. On Wednesday, May 20th, we were thinking about, excuse me, I think I flipped to the wrong page here. No, I think we need to go back to Wednesday, May 20th. Yes, thank you, Constance. We were thinking about a new normal. And we will hear poems from two poets writing on that day. Carolyn Plath's poem will be read by Mary Eichbauer, and then we will hear from Becky Bishop White.
Thank you, Mary Susan. One effect that COVID had was that it isolated us from our friends, from people that we saw all the time. And some of them we never saw in person again because they died during COVID. And Carolyn Plath was one of my friends who I never saw in person again. She did not die of COVID. She died of cancer last December, but we left things at each other's doorsteps and we saw each other on Zoom, but it kind of made the loss worse than it even would have been. In these 4 haiku that Carolyn wrote, she displays her characteristic sharp humor. Corona haiku. Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men. Corona haircut. Pork chop for breakfast. Cheerios and Oreos. Corona diet. No bath yesterday or day before. Corona hygiene. Zoom conversations. Brave new world. WhatsApp FaceTime. Corona, my dear.
Hello there. Glad you're all here. This poem was influenced by remembering true life experiences I had in 2019 that were no longer possible in May 2020, when we were still very much in shutdown mode. The pandemic had made life wildly strange. Going to a county fair, as my husband Jim and I did in June of 2019, and experiencing that bottlenecked entry with a crowd of strangers all eagerly seeking a fun time, Would that ever happen again? Would we ever stay in a favorite hotel as we did in December in Berkeley in 2019 and visit old friends and hop on BART to events in San Francisco? And remember that at this time, there was a lot of speculation about what caused COVID, but no firm answers and no vaccine. Quarantine dreams. I'm in a crowd watching a parade. I'm in a hotel where I've previously stayed. I'm bottlenecked at the entrance to the county fair. People everywhere, breathing the same air. A passing stranger elbows me and doesn't give an apology. My everyday life of the past, every night in my dreams is cast. Perhaps a forecast of things to come. Perhaps those things are forever done. By the sun, I shrug through my quarantine routines. By the moon, I slip into my quarantine dreams.
The US death toll from COVID-19 that day, 97,249. Sunday, June 21st, we had both reality and blessing on the page. Rana Leone will bring us the reality part of that.
I often write poems to find out what I'm actually thinking. It's a way for me to both imagine talking to someone outside myself and to talk to myself as well. And this poem was a poem like that, and it's called Hubris. What made us think we'd be immune? Didn't we read about the honeybee hive collapse? Didn't we follow the progress of white nose in bats? Didn't we understand about the effects of pollution on the fish? Why are we so slow to connect the dots? Did we think we'd solved biology, tamed the jungles, flattened volcanoes, destroyed fungus, held at bay the floods with aging dams? Where were you during the forest fires last summer? How many hurricanes are predicted for this year? And what happened to a short tornado season? Maybe we forgot to read the fine print. Maybe whistling in the dark can work. Maybe we don't need a sense of history and its lessons. Maybe we just can't get it together. But let's wake up to reality. Just once, just now. Of course, you say reality is ever changing within our closed system, but let's face what we are. Let's face our folly, our hubris. We're just one of the endangered animals on this glorious planet that isn't designed for our pleasure, safety, or exclusive benefit. That's a basic rule. It's best to understand it.
The total US deaths from COVID-19 that day, 123,084.
Hi. Go ahead.
Okay, July 15th brings us over time. Lauren.
I actually wrote this poem on April 1st, but I didn't hear about your wonderful project for another couple months. So when you listen to the poem, I want you to imagine that I actually was writing it around April 1st when everything was beginning. And I would like to compliment the community of Benicia and its poet laureate for such an incredible project. It's really moving. When I was whole, I would wake and wait until it was light, or often go out in the starlit dark to grab my paper. Coffee and paper. The ritual was like warming my hands over a fire, a start to the day. Unlock the back door for grandson, make him toast and water for school, out to the car, perfectly timed or not, to trudge with the army of parents, our children to the doors. When I was whole, all of my parts still inside me, not disposed of in medical waste. Periods never bothered me. I was glad to have them, stopping only for pregnancies. Ticking in and out the years, the decades, 30s, 40s, I thought that was the end of the story of those organs. I thought I'd be getting coffee and paper day in and out until everything changed. They cut out my insides and the world reeled and stopped. Thousands of people are dying from an invisible plague. There is no more school, and I am not whole, yet still alive. The days of my organs inside me are over, and what lies ahead of me and all of us, no one can say.
$138,457 total US deaths from COVID-19. July 24th. We thought about distant and close by. We'll hear from Kathleen Herman.
I wrote.
You're muted, Kathleen. There you are.
Thank you. This poem is about a student I worked with in the Vallejo Public Schools. I wanted to bring literacy to children who were struggling to learn to read. And it can certainly be a game changer in terms of what children imagine they can do as they get older, important part of their development. And so this poem is about the one day a week I volunteered and I worked intensively with this particular student until COVID. And after that, when we were isolated from each other, I had concerns about him and all the children in his situation, going home to homes that weren't functioning, that couldn't support his development. 6 miles away. On Tuesday mornings, I drove the 6 miles to your school, its faded facade looking weary from decades of trying. You would fly to the back table where we conspired to hack the printed code. Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. It was late December when your childhood ended. Dad overdosed and died. Mom went to jail. Grandma brought you to school when she wasn't too high. Primal screams and chair throwing. Frightened classmates shrank away. Exiled to the principal's office again. On your small shoulders, you bear the misery of ancestors you don't even know. Still, you burned through word games and tongue twisters, beaming when you got it right. On Tuesday afternoons, I drove the 6 miles home, skirting drab concrete buildings, brown weedy lawns, iron gated doors, run down bars, I-80 depositing me onto more familiar terrain, winding down to the waterfront past groomed yards, pulling into my driveway, blushes of bougainvillea framing the front door. 6 miles away, you send your SOS. It rises, joining a chorus of innocent pleas. No more pretending. I hear you.
Total deaths from COVID-19, 146,764. Sunday, July 6th brought poems on Sundays and holidays. D.L. Lang will read for us.
In the weeks leading up to Independence Day in 2020, in spite of the risk of the pandemic, millions of people around the world marched in the streets after the murder of George Floyd. Like many before him, he was denied his constitutional right to due process and given the death penalty by an abusive cop. While many of us had already been aware of this ongoing pattern of injustice in our country, and had demonstrated for Black Lives Matter in the previous decade, the pandemic had canceled most of society's usual distractions, bringing larger awareness of police violence to the mainstream. Here in Vallejo, where I live, this escalated due to the murder of Sean Monterosa by Vallejo police at the height of the protests. In the state of California, Vallejo ranks third when it comes to the number of people shot by police per capita. There were over a dozen protests in Solano County alone, and the National Guard was called into Vallejo after an attempted arson at City Hall. I participated in many of the demonstrations and wrote poems as a form of historical documentation. All of this was on my mind as Independence Day came that year, and the poem July 4th, 2020, which appears in Yearning to Breathe Free, was a reflection of living in a nation that constantly falls short of her written ideals. Celebrating independence from British colonialism when our black and brown neighbors are still suffering from racist policies and people were losing their jobs en masse due to the pandemic seemed wildly out of touch. July 4th, 2020. America, your people are falling through the cracks. With every vote, demonstration, and molten statue, they cry out for you to change your violent ways. America, the foundations upon which you stand are cracked until you deal with the mold and rot of hatred, murder, and oppression you have dealt. America, I await the day those ideals you taught begin to mold the true reality of everyone's life. For your hymns touting liberty and justice for all are merely myths crackling like the dust in the wind that bury the truth of centuries of sorrow and pain. If my brothers and sisters cannot breathe freely, then how dare we call this a land of liberty? If money is the rubric that divides our people, then how dare we claim that all people are equal? If my neighbors are sleeping out on the streets, then how dare we say this is a land of welcoming? America, put down your hot dogs, beer, and fireworks. This is no time to celebrate. This is the time to end hate.
And on July 26th, the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 was 148,213. On Friday, August 7th, we came together around silence and distance, and we'll hear from Nina Serrano.
During the pandemic, we were asked to keep 6 feet apart. And my poem is called Women 6 Feet Apart. She enters through the backyard gate, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. Entering the garden, I greet her wearing my pandemic mask. Sitting under a shade on the patio couch, we settle into a familiar intimacy for a comforting chat. She takes out a piece she's crocheting as we talk. She calls it Seedlings. She tells me it's about her and her recently deceased sister. We speak of grief and healing. Her fingers move as a bass line to the melody of our voices, speaking from our inner themes and deep knowledge of each other's histories. I feel myself being snugly stitched into the work by the hand-spun woolen threads, the colors merging with our exchanged words, filling in the forced distance, strengthening our bond with love.
That day, the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 was 161,885. September 18th. Yes, September 18th. Brought us to timely and timeless concerns. Tamar Enoch was going to read her Signs of Love today, but I do not believe she was able to make it. And if she is not here, then let's go back to Nina, who is going to read her coronavirus pandemic.
Excuse me, Mary Susan, I believe the poet for September 9th is available.
Did I skip that? I'm sorry. I did. I'm terribly sorry. This is what happens when I do a lot of page shuffling. All right, September 9th comes before September 19th, as it did in 2020 and has every year before and since. Okay, picking up on what we had heard from the July 4th holiday, a lot of us were settling in with that realization that there were more than 8 minutes and 46 seconds in May to consider. So we will hear from Akila Lewis-Ross.
It's really hard to hear and to remember all the different things that happened back then. And some things are still happening now. My poem, Hello, My Name is Courage, just, it kind of hurts to talk about. It hurts to remember and to remember that I saw people actually dying and heard these things. I'm sorry, you can hear my daughter in the background. And then also just my ancestors. There's a lot of folks that I don't remember, but I guess my body and my heart and my soul remembers the things that happened to my ancestors on both sides of my family who were enslaved. And there's a little bit of mixture of all those different things that are in this. So I guess I'll start there. Hello, my name is Courage. How do you smile after so many deaths when innocent loved ones are murdered in their homes, in their beds, seeking rest from the day before? How do you smile after so many deaths, murdered by them boys in blue, kneeled down on necks, bodies beaten black and blue over $20? How many times do the innocent have to scream, I can't breathe? When will the innocents be heard? And in times like these, poetic verse bandages peel off too easily. It can't change actions passed down 400 years later. Ancestors speak. My mama instinct has been triggered, so naturally I provide shelter. My babies have learned to duck and cover under eagle's wings. It takes courage to smile. After all the deaths, I have forgotten how. It sometimes hurts to try. No amount of therapy sessions can help me remember why I should. Because I refuse to smile until justice is served.
And on September 9th, the total US death toll from COVID-19 was 191,507. Moving now to Friday, September 18th. Nina, will you take us to that place of timely and timeless?
Yes. This poem was published on September 18th, 2020. but it was written earlier in April when I read about how an Italian hospital staff was being forced to choose whom they would save and who they would let die because they were so overladen. Dear sick Italian octogenarians, I too am 80. It saddens me that you will be allowed to die from lack of hospital facilities. I hope the effects of the illness are not so horrendous that you could still have peace to review your life, be satisfied and ready to leave the hospital bed, medicine and care for the next younger person's turn at this precious thing called life. Is all you have ever known since birth. I hope feelings of gratitude and graciousness overwhelm you in your breaths, and your soul leaves your body feeling love.
And on that date, the total US deaths from COVID-19 came to 199,112. Wednesday, October 14th, we had poems written in praise. Mary Eichbauer will read hers.
This was a response, of course, to the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We all felt some foreboding at that point. However, I don't think anyone quite realized how systematic the Supreme Court would be, the new Supreme Court would be in removing right after right. But this poem is without the benefit of foresight. Homage to RBG. She held back the storm alone, and we knew she was a hero, but we didn't know how lonely it would feel standing here without her. She didn't get upset about it, just did what she needed to do, pretending when she had to, because her goal was freedom. That's all that mattered, not being tied down to some man's idea of a life, winning justice, undoing the chains, and now they can't wait to put her memory in the ground. Now that she can no longer face them down with her steely eyes, her strength that finally failed her. She knew they were waiting, even if we didn't.
And on that date, the total US deaths from COVID-19 were 217,895. October 23rd, more than 7 months into this pandemic, no end in sight. Joanne Jagoda will read for us.
I wrote a number of poems about COVID on my purple leather sofa in my family room. It seems like in the afternoon I would be watching CNN and I'd be listening to Dr. Anthony Fauci, and many times he said, an abundance of caution, do this or do that, in an abundance of caution. And I really took to heart what he said, and I always looked to him for hope and understanding and prayers and everything. So I submitted this poem in October, but it actually refers to April 2020. An abundance of caution, April 2020. There is no simple anymore. No simple trip to the store or pharmacy. No simple get-togethers with family or friends. We are aliens in a strange new world, where the road to the new normal is lined with fear and uncertainty. The rules are changeable and confusing. And why is it the more they tell us to distance, the more we crave human interaction? I wave at the mailman, the garbage collector, and every neighbor I pass on the street, despite my mask. Alienation and loneliness have become constant companions. Even language has been altered at the gate. We've had to grasp the meaning of PPEs, flattening the curve, contact tracing, as if they are foreign vocabulary. We have become seasoned Zoom masters. It is painful to hear the stories of lives upended, desperate, ordinary people struggling, some coping with the untimely loss of loved ones. And there is not yet an end date visible on the horizon. So, in an abundance of caution, eat chocolate every day. Use the good silver. Take out that bottle of Domaine Chandon you've been saving, and slow dance whenever you get the chance.
And by October 23rd, the total US deaths from COVID-19 were 225,387. And we leave our readings for today at that point. I want to thank all of you who have written for the column and for the anthology, and particularly those of you who have read today for putting forth your experience of that time, of that era, and hearing it read so well and in consecutive order, I think really took all of us back to that place and that time when we didn't quite know what was happening yet. And we're not quite sure what to look forward to. I'm also aware of Elizabeth's opening comment about the power of poetry. One of the quotes that appears in the book, we got some voices from different places and different times too, but one of the quotes from a professor of mine, Walter Brueggemann, was about the power of poetry, and he wrote that it is shattering, evocative speech that breaks fixed conclusions and presses us always toward new, dangerous, imaginative possibilities. And you have certainly done that. Thank you. So why don't we go back to gallery view or speaker view, and we can look at this as the time that we'll be taking some time to talk together and to raise some questions or to make comments for discussion. And Johanna, I'm wondering if you are able to, you've been able to take a look at the chats to see if there is anything there that might be a question that we should be dealing with. And if you'd like to take a moment, that's fine too.
No questions so far. Let's give
Okay.
everybody a moment to see if they have any, and I'll check. Maybe give people 3 to 5 minutes to think about that, and we'll go from there.
If there's someone who hasn't written something and would just like to, you can use the, what is this, on the reactions button. If you can